Hello, I'm Rachael Fones, Director of Government and Public Affairs at IQVIA, a leading healthcare data, technology, and research company. I'm here today also in my role as Chair of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee for ACRO. ACRO represents the global clinical research and technology organizations that conduct or support a majority of industry-sponsored clinical trials around the world today. The ACRO members share a common commitment to leveraging our reach and innovations to help improve diversity in clinical trials. I'm personally thrilled to have this opportunity to talk with Research America and this broad and passionate group of people in the research ecosystem, and particularly about this topic. It was actually from Research America, among a handful of others, that I first heard about this issue in the 90s. When years later I went to work for the largest CRO, I was struck that we were still talking about this, but also was fascinated by the complexity of clinical trials and all the operational elements and people it takes to run a large-scale clinical trial. I became particularly interested in identifying and sharing practical opportunities to make progress. So today, I want to share a few thoughts on how we could maybe reframe many of the common themes we've been talking about for decades and make some progress. Yes, we have tremendous momentum and tremendous progress right now and focus on this issue, but how do we make that sustainable? It has to be a future where diversity in clinical trials is commonplace. Do you remember when work was a place you went to and home was where you went to relax? When you made choices, dress professionally, dress comfortably. You were either at the office or at home. The pandemic has yielded the home office, staycations, Zoom clothes, and regrettably, perhaps the fashion loungewear industry. Thought about how these previously opposed concepts, these either ors or perhaps parallels, if you will, some of the binary assumptions that I've seen that are common and too often go unchallenged and unexplored when it comes to diversity in clinical trials. While diversity in clinical trials is a complex and multi-pronged issue, what if we started to look at some of these hesitations and understandable headwinds that get in the way of the rubber truly meeting the road on a consistent basis? Again, in that machinery of the clinical trials and operations processes. Can we take today's momentum and make it business as usual? One of the biggest either ors or beliefs and concerns and trade-offs that people just across the spectrum often are concerned about is whether clinical trial enrollment can be both diverse and on time. I mean, it's logical, honestly, that anytime you add more criteria to a trial, you have more potential to make the trials longer. Constraining enrollment can lead to delays. Adding diversity goals, where there's an assumption that diverse patients will take longer to recruit, just amplifies that concern. But the good news is, we know it's possible. We saw with some of the COVID vaccine trials, the most ambitious ever in size and speed, where planning and continual intentional focus on diversity was applied. We collectively, industry-sponsored, NIH GovVPN sites, the CRO sites, individuals on the ground collectively reached enrollment in record time, and we achieved it with greater than 35% from diverse patients. We did all that without delaying the trial. It is possible, but recognizing this was an extraordinary effort, we still have demonstrated that turning a diversity lens to the way we plan and support clinical trials, applying our data analytics and technology and collective will, working closely with the sites, we can engage the communities, generate referrals, and meet diversity goals. It's critical that we challenge the foregone conclusions that it's going to take longer. If we use tools and data and technology to reduce the likelihood of delays and provide sponsors and investigators and study staff with the ability to keep an eye on enrollment and dial up and down what's working and what's not, perhaps we can gain more comfort with the idea of being diverse and on track, on time. The second one is more of an if-then. If we use traditional sites, we won't get to diversity. So we must need new sites. There's really no shortage of efforts and investments that have been made in diversity in clinical trials around, based on this common and somewhat binary perception. But the question that strikes me is, if this hasn't really worked, what can we do? It hasn't worked in the past when we focus on it. What can we do this time to make sure it does? So we tested the conception of whether or not, the trials we use on a regular basis. IQVIA, for example, has over 190 some prime and partner sites that represent over 2,000 site locations just in the US. These are people we work with fairly regularly and then trust our sponsors' trials based on their proven ability to deliver data quality, enrollment, and meet all their requirements and important things in clinical trials. We asked them about diversity. Out of the 190 some responses we got, greater than 50% are in highly diverse demographic areas, and 59% reported having between 10 and 80% of their patient population from Black or Latino communities. In fact, 30% reported a patient pool above 30% of these diverse communities. Through some qualitative and quantitative discussions, we really think that the idea here, if we challenge that assumption and we leverage today's infrastructures, help them tap their potential, support them where they need the support, and ask them to always recruit to the diverse proportionate representation of the disease, then we can also simultaneously invest in volume and scale. Third, a trial, sometimes you hear, especially statisticians, that a trial is either powered for subgroups or there's really no reason to have subgroup targets, if you will. So you can't really get to increased knowledge or find subgroup signals if you don't start somewhere. And so ideally we start earlier and we build the evidence, but we have to start somewhere. And many programs are midway. And we can't let that absence of a signal or the concern about powering justify not enrolling and opening up access and starting to build that database. So that's another one we need to challenge. There's a few more, such as if the population doesn't trust us, do people start to think, well, they won't participate, so we don't ask. If we set targets in a protocol, somewhere in the protocol document or the upfront documents, do we risk failing? My question would be, well, if that's not the right place, then what else? What else can we do there? If we deploy decentralized technologies, we'll make it better and be successful. I think that that's in part true, but we need to be careful that it's not also binary. It's more than just deploying technology we look out. And lastly, I'd like to just say a word about what seems to strike me as somewhat of a divide or disconnect between the federally funded world of research and the independent commercial research. We saw the power of combining the best of what NIH brought together with IQVIA and the CRO sponsored sites. We saw when we worked together collaboratively and deployed our tools and their experience and expertise as well, that we were able to really knock it out of the park. Now, often the policies and solutions that are talked about today among policymakers and the like reflect only one side of that equation. If we want to impact the broader knowledge base about variability in treatments and outcomes and improve access to research, then us policymakers, we need to think about solutions that empower us to build on the strengths of both sectors. Thank you for this opportunity. I leave you with one final challenge. When you start talking about diversity with your colleagues, think about whether you are making false trade-offs or assumptions that you could challenge, or better yet, prove that they aren't true. We've seen it's possible. We can achieve diverse clinical trials and be on time, just as one can dress professionally and comfortably at the same time.